All right, so first of all, a little bit about me. I've been doing DevOps work for over 15 years. I've held positions as a Unix administrator, as a developer, architect, system tester, network engineer, but I've always kind of had my foot in between the development and operations world. I'm a big Gradle weenie. I've been using it since the early days, written a couple of plugins, and as of a couple weeks ago, I'm now a member of the Gradleware team, which is something that I'm real excited about. I believe in relentless automation. I think that you should automate until there's nothing left to automate, and then you start automating the automation. I think it's the only way to create a efficient and bearable software development lifecycle. So what can you do? Ask questions. Trust me, you don't want to listen to me drone on for an hour and a half. Please, the more interactive this is, the more you're going to get out of it, the more interesting it's going to be. So feel free to interrupt me at any point in time if there's something that's not very clear, and ask whatever questions that come up. And finally, complete the evaluation. That's how they determine which of these talks are, valuable or not. So take a few minutes, give them that feedback. So what are we going to talk about today? First of all, I want to kind of talk about an evolution of Jenkins management in terms of, kind of my evolution, I should say, in terms of how you, or some of the things that I came across as my Jenkins environment grew and I was trying to find better and better ways to manage it. I think it's a pretty typical evolution. We'll see. Then I want to talk a little bit about the Gradle Jenkins Plugin, which is a plugin that I wrote, and talk about some of the basics of how to use it. And finally, I want to get into some demonstrations. The lion's share of this will be just kind of doing some demonstrations of using the Gradle Jenkins plugin for installations of various sizes. So what do we like about Jenkins? First of all, it's open source, which is great because it means that it's free. It also means that we have access to the source code. We can look at, if we have questions, we can go in and look and find answers to our questions. It has a nice distributed model. So we can create a server farm, push out hundreds of jobs, thousands of jobs into our server farm, and manage them from a central location. It's very extensible. We can write our own plugins. So we can create plugins to add in whatever functionality that we want within Jenkins. And it's got an active ecosystem. So there's lots of people out there writing plugins. There's also active development on the core. So new features are being added, new bugs are being fixed, that sort of thing. So what do we not like about Jenkins? Well, as it turns out, there's not a lot in Jenkins, or at least Jenkins out of the box, to help you manage the complexity of your environment. So, as we get beyond, say, 20, 30 jobs, there's not a lot there to help us. There are a few things that come in the form of plugins and such, and I'm going to talk about a few of those things. But for the most part, once we get into a large environment, we're kind of left on our own to figure out how to make that manageable. So when we talk about some sort of tool or something to manage Jenkins, what are some of the motivations that we might have? So one category of motivations I would consider would be motivations around discipline, right? So one of the things I might want to be able to do is track changes within my Jenkins environment. So as things get changed, out of the box, somebody goes in, they edit something in the GUI. You don't really know when that was changed, who changed it, that sort of thing. There are a few things that, some plugins that are out there, like the audit plugin as well as the job config history plugin. They provide some things for us, but this is something that we've been doing in the software or in the source code world for a long time. So if I could leverage my existing tools, within VCS to track changes, that would be great. Another thing that we might want to do is couple our configuration with our project. So as my application evolves, so would my Jenkins configurations would evolve with that. And it would be nice if I could kind of couple those together into the same repository or what have you. The other thing from a discipline perspective is the ability to perform validations, right? So if I'm making a change that I think is going to affect 3 jobs, I want to be able to validate that it's only going to affect those 3 jobs. What I don't want to have happen is that I make a change, it ends up affecting 300 jobs, and now I've got to figure out how to go back and fix that, or have to explain to a bunch of angry developers why they just got spammed with a bunch of failures. Another set of motivations that we might have are around maintenance. So one might be to, certainly would be to minimize the overhead, right? What I want to be able to do is work on really fun stuff. I don't want to be sitting there clicking 4,000 times in the Jenkins GUI. All things being equal, I'd like to leverage my existing skill set. So there's nothing wrong with a polyglot environment, but if I've got everything in the same language or in the same tool, I might be able to gain some synergies between the different automations within my continuous delivery pipeline, and gain some value there. I want my stuff to be dry. I don't want to squeeze the balloon here. I don't want to get away from doing manual edits within Jenkins only to create the same amount of work in some sort of other tool. So if at all possible, where things are the same within my Jenkins configuration, I want the tool to handle all that sameness and do that. I only want to have to manage and configure the differences between my jobs. I'd like to be able to rebuild from scratch. So the idea is if I'm making changes within my Jenkins architecture, say I'm moving my master from one server to another because I'm now expanding out into a much larger farm or something. I don't want to have to do something where I'm, say, tarring up the Jenkins configuration on one server, moving it over to the other, and then going in and reconfiguring everything in there. What I want to do is use a tool to change all that configuration. I bring it down on one server, I bring it up on the other server, bring it up clean on the other server, and then I just push all that change out. If I'm, say, a build master in a large organization, I've got a lot of different groups that I delegate out a lot of responsibility for maintaining their jobs and the such. What I may want to be able to do is delegate some of the responsibility around configuring their Jenkins jobs to them. I might still maintain some responsibility in terms of enforcing standards and things like that, but I might give them some limited amount of configuration responsibility, and I would like a tool that could help me do that as well. And part and parcel of that is the ability to enforce standards. So, that may mean in some environments that ability to delegate out and enforce some of those standards. In other environments, it may mean that I'm taking on all the responsibility myself and I'm managing everything from a big central, a centralized position. Okay, so I want to talk about the evolution of some, or my evolution within managing Jenkins. Now I'm going to talk about some of these other tools. My intention is not to position the Gradle Jenkins plugin as the best possible solution. If you're using one of these other solutions and you're happy with it, I'm not trying to convince you that you should use something else. What I'm really trying to do is just kind of position the Gradle Jenkins plugin in the kinds of problems that it's good at, and kind of talk about some of the limitations of the others. So if you're like me, you found Jenkins, this is cool, you start configuring jobs. Pretty soon you discover the fact that you can do the copy from existing, so you don't have to configure every job from scratch. And so you start copying, and sooner or later you get to a point where you've got way too many jobs to handle just by doing manual edits. And so you start looking for other solutions. And probably the first thing that you would come across are script solutions. So these are things like the script console within Jenkins, the system Groovy scripts or Scriptler. And then at some point you start to find the limitations of that, and you move on to what I would call job-like solutions. Now, job-like solutions are things like the Jenkins template plugin and the very fine Jenkins Job DSL plugin. Depending on your environment, you may only have one Jenkins, farm, if you will. So you've got one master, a bunch of slaves. In other environments, you may have multiple masters and slaves, all around, depending on what your architecture is. If you get beyond the single master, you start kind of thinking about more external solutions, things that run outside of the outside of the Jenkins box. These are not things that run within the Jenkins container. They run outside and kind of push configuration onto your Jenkins environment. And these are things like the Jenkins Job Builder and the Gradle Jenkins Plugin. So let's talk about some of those in a little more detail. There's not a lot to say about manual solutions other than that at some point the complexity kind of overwhelms you. You have to find kind of a higher order solution to managing your environment. Script solutions, these are extremely powerful. Basically what they allow you to do is manipulate the Jenkins objects within memory. So these are scripts that kind of run within the Jenkins container. They allow you to kind of manipulate stuff, so, change job configuration, save them, that sort of thing. What it does require, though, is a very strong understanding of the Jenkins model. So you have to understand, if I want to change this particular attribute, how do I find that? How do I get to that through the Jenkins objects? And there's not a lot of good information around how to do this. What you find yourself doing is pulling down the Jenkins source, kind of sifting through it and interrogating it to try to figure out how to do what you're trying to accomplish. But the problem, kind of the problem with that is that, when you're just trying to change one attribute, you don't want to spend 20 minutes looking through the source code until you figure out how to do it. The good thing is that they are written in Groovy, so when we talk about leveraging our existing skill set, if you're here, you're probably using Gradle, you're probably familiar with Groovy, so that's good. One of the problems with it is there's limited support for parameterization. So what you find yourself doing is kind of copying scripts around, maybe editing them. You might have some block in the top that kind of sets all of your parameters, and you're editing them every time you run it. It's possible, but it's just really clunky. I find that these are kind of best for one-off type things, right? So something where I'm going to change this one thing in all of my jobs once, and I'm never going to run it again. It's a fine job. It's a fine solution for that sort of thing. It's not a great solution for managing, long term, I don't think. So you move on to like the job-like solutions. The job template plugin. Basically, what this allows you to do is configure a job that is your kind of a template job, and then all of your other jobs basically have pointers into this one template job. And so anytime that they run, they're really running like the builders or the publishers or whatever that's in the template job. This creates a many-to-one relationship, which is great because it means that if I want to change something in 400 jobs that all point to this one template job, I just have to change it in that template job, and it immediately takes effect on all 400 of these other jobs. At the same time, it's kind of a dual-edged sword because what ends up happening is that sooner or later you wake up and you realize, out of my 400 jobs, 120 of these I really want to be slightly different. And so you have to create a new template job and then point those 120 to the new job, and you kind of end up back in this manual editing mode. Or maybe you leverage the scripting thing, but it becomes kind of a problem. And I found this is one of the steps that I spent a little bit of time on as I was growing my Jenkins environment. I found that was happening more and more often. I find that these are best when they're combined in that you create very small composable templates, and you kind of put them together in different ways for different jobs. But the smaller and more composable you make them, the more template jobs you have, the more of those you have to manage. So now, Job DSL Plugin. I think a lot of people end up on this. They find they're happy with it, and this is what they end up using. It's a really great solution. Number one, it implements a very powerful DSL for describing Jenkins jobs. In fact, the Gradle Jenkins plugin uses this DSL, for creating its own jobs. So if you want to think about it, the Gradle Jenkins plugin is really just a way of taking some of the power that's in this Job DSL plugin, pulling it outside of the box, and allowing you to use it from Gradle. The DSL plugin allows you to store your scripts off into scripts on the file system, so you could store them in source control, and then basically tell the DSL plugin, or the job that you configure, they call them seed jobs, basically tell it to interrogate, say, a directory, run all the scripts that are in this directory, that sort of thing. It does have a support for templates. So the point is you can configure a template and then generate hundreds, thousands of jobs off of a single template in your configuration. One of the limitations of this is that there's not a lot of good validation solutions or validation capabilities with the DSL plugin. There are some things that you can do in terms of maybe dumping the configuration out and then interrogating it with, doing diffs or something like that. But there's nothing that's really kind of first-class support with it, within this. And the other limitation that it has is that it really only affects the one instance where it is. So if you have an environment where you've got multiple masters or something, you really have to have at least one seed job in each of those masters that are out there. Jenkins Job Builder. This is written in Python. The configuration is in YAML. It's part of the OpenStack stack. The YAML produces some very clean configurations within this, and it's nice from that perspective. But it's purely declarative. It does have some support for things like macro type capabilities, where you can describe a job and then kind of do some templating type stuff. But you don't have the ability to do any sort of looping or any sort of procedural stuff that you might want. So that brings us to Gradle Jenkins Plugin. It's a programmatic solution. You're running in Gradle, so you've got all the power of Groovy, of Gradle, and the such to programmatically configure your Jenkins environment. It allows you to directly manipulate the XML that goes into your jobs, or it allows you to use the Jenkins Job DSL to define your jobs and otherwise manipulate them. It also provides support for template jobs. Again, we can define a single template, generate dozens of jobs off of it. And in terms of capabilities, it allows you to create your jobs, delete jobs. It also allows you to do validation of jobs, and as well as you can export your configuration and interrogate it with anything on the file system. So, I want to ask a question. We're going to come back to this later, but does it make sense? Is it a good fit for us to manage Jenkins with a build automation tool? Think about it. We'll come back to it. All right. So first of all, some concepts here. With the Gradle Jenkins plugin, you kind of have this idea of a static model versus a live model. So the static model is what you've got in Gradle, the jobs, views, templates, and the such that I've kind of configured within my Gradle runtime. The live model is what's actually configured up on Jenkins. So any of the tasks within Gradle are really operating on one or both of these models. So when I do an update, I'm really just kind of pushing static model into the live model. So let's talk about the tasks real quick. So out of the box, update Jenkins items. What this does is takes the configuration that you've got in your static model, what you've configured in Gradle, pushes it up onto your server or servers, depending on what you've configured. Delete Jenkins items does the opposite, right? It just, whatever you've got configured in your static model, it removes that from the live model, from the servers. You've also got the ability to dump the configuration. What this does is it dumps the static model, what you've got configured in Gradle, dumps it out to the file system, and then you can do whatever you want to with it. You can go in and look at it and validate if that's what you want to do. But you can also just run validate Jenkins items. And what this does is compares your static model with your live model, tells you, okay, these are the jobs that are actually different. So you can validate what's actually changed. Now this validation is not just a straight text comparison of the job configurations. It's actually an XML diff. So what it's looking for is what are the different, are the same elements, attributes, and values there. One of the limitations of this is that if you stick to just using the Gradle Jenkins plugin to manage your configurations, this will almost always work. If you've got people going in and doing manual edits within Jenkins, even if functionally the job hasn't changed, when Jenkins serializes the job XML and saves it. It can add things like different attributes that don't have a functional effect, but they're just kind of in the XML, and it'll trigger a difference with the validation. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind. You can also do dump remote Jenkins items, which works just like dump Jenkins items, except it's dumping the live model. So it's dumping the stuff out of the server or servers onto your local file system, and you can do something with it. All right. So some of the conventions that get added when you apply the Jenkins plugin. Now, I'm going to show you some of these examples. They're going to be very bare bones. When I get into the demonstrations, you'll see much more realistic configurations. So at a kind of like 10,000 foot view, it applies this Jenkins script block. You've got servers, which configure what servers I'm going to deploy to in my environment. You can define as many servers as you want to. And those servers will then be referenced from your jobs or your views to tell them which server that they need to be deployed to. You've got templates. These are common templates that you would use for generating jobs. They're basically just a job description, but they don't actually ever get pushed out to the server or anything. They purely live within the static model only. Then you've got your jobs, which are exactly what you would think they are. They're the definitions of the individual jobs that I want to push out to my environment, as well as views, which are configuration of the views. So let's look at an example of a server. You can do both secure and non-secure servers. The default is to be secure, in which case you need to define the URL, the username, and the password for your server. Now, when we look at this script block, what we've got is basically a collection of named objects in here. So server 1 is one server. If I were to put in an additional server, server 2, it would just be another script block underneath this, all contained within the server's script block. At this point, I can refer to this server object as servers.server1. Like I said, we support unsecure servers, but because it's not the default, you have to explicitly tell it that it's not secure. Templates. So you'll find with a lot of the DSL, there's both an XML and a DSL form, and then there's multiple forms as well, either as files or strings or whatever, or actually closure forms as well. In this particular instance, what I'm defining is a template called template 1. Again, this is just a configuration container. These are all named, so the more templates I add in here, templates.template1, .template2, you see the creativity abounds there. This is showing the XML form. So what this is actually saying is that for my template 1, the configuration is the XML that's in the file called template.xml in my project. I can also use a DSL form. Same sort of thing, except the configuration is in a DSL file that's on my local file system called template.dsl. So jobs, same sort of thing, named containers. And you'll see the first thing here is that this particular job is defining servers.server1 as the server that it will be deployed to. Yep.
On your previous slide, the DSL, is that the jobs DSL?
Yeah, Jenkins Jobs DSL. So just to repeat the question for the microphone, the question was on the previous slide was the DSL, is that Jenkins Job DSL? And the answer is yes. So I can push a particular job out to multiple servers if I wanted to. So I could potentially have like a local test server that I define in here, and I only sometimes push to my local test server to just kind of eyeball it, as well as my actual production server, that sort of thing. But the point is, you can add as many servers on here as you want to. And then this is also using the file form to load the XML from the local file system. This is DSL form, and I'm introducing one additional thing here. This using template 1. This is kind of typical Jenkins job DSL for using a template, but this is actually going to use template 1 that I defined before. So this is how you would build a job off of an existing template. And what I'd probably end up doing in a real configuration, this is just a scaled down one to keep it within the size of the slide. What I would probably do here is have a whole bunch of additional DSL that also continues to edit that particular job, and vary it from the template. You're starting to get the idea here. Views, same sort of thing. You've got an XML form. You've also got a DSL form. Okay. One other thing to look at here is there's also a multiple DSL form. So if I've already got, say, a Jenkins job DSL configuration that I've configured, I've got it laid out as a bunch of DSL files on my file system. I want to convert over to this. On the main Jenkins script block, there is also these capabilities where I can just give it a file tree and say, okay, look in this directory, anything that ends with a DSL extension, configure all those jobs, put them into my Gradle static model. Likewise, I can also just configure the DSL inline if I wanted to. So I could just pull, if I had it configured within just Jenkins Job DSL Plugin interface, I could pull that script out, put it right in there, and it should just work. Okay, so before I move on, are there any questions on what I've talked about up to this point? Sure.
Yes, so you create this Gradle build that uses this plugin. Is this something that you execute offline from Jenkins, or do you
Yes.
set it into a Jenkins C job? Or?
Well, it really doesn't matter, right? So one way you could do it is that, I've just got it completely outside of Jenkins. My Jenkins admin just runs it manually, runs it as a Gradle build. The other thing, and the way that I've implemented in the past, you could put this into a job, run it just like any other Gradle job within your Jenkins environment, trigger it off of an SCM change. So I edit my configuration, I do a validation just to see that, yeah, okay, it's going to do what I want it to do, check it in, push it up, and then the job recognizes, oh, hey, something's changed, run the run the update Jenkins items, and it's going to change everything.
So to add to that, so if I did that and I'm actually running it on my Jenkins box,
Mm-hmm.
does that still require the credentials to deal with the Jenkins model?
Well, what it's doing, it's actually connecting externally. So it's using the REST interfaces of Jenkins. Let me repeat your question. The question was, if I'm running that on my Jenkins server, do I still need to use the credentials? And the answer is yes, because it's connecting to the REST interface of Jenkins. It's connecting externally, even if it's still on the same box. Okay. So let's look at some demonstrations. Yeah, I'm sorry.
So if you go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
Do you normally just have one area where you dump all these DSLs, or do you partition them out in some kind of patterned way?
Yeah, I mean, that's typically what I do is I configure just about everything within build scripts, and I just use kind of like script plugin type stuff to do that. Now, there's no reason why you can't just do this too. This is more just to provide as many different solutions, and this is probably a good way to transition from, say, a Jenkins job DSL, whatever you've already got, and pull it into Gradle Jenkins Plugin. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Let's look at some demonstrations. I won't be juggling fire. Apparently, Hyatt frowns upon such activities. But I will be doing a live demo, so same difference. All right. Okay. So the first example that I want to show you is going to be just a brain dead example of how I could just take an existing Jenkins configuration, pull it into the Gradle script, and run it. So it's just going to be one job, in one script. But first thing I would do is go ahead and configure my a Jenkins job. So I'm going to call it demo job. We'll make it a freestyle project. All right. Let's go ahead and configure a few things about it. We'll add a Gradle build here. Just add a task, build. And we'll just leave it at that. That's enough to show us. So now I can get at this XML by just adding this /config XML onto the end of my job URL. And that dumps the XML here. And I can take that and, oops, let's do, oops. Let's put that into so I've basically taken created a job configuration, saved it locally. And if I look at my build.gradle here, so first thing you see here is under my build scripts, I'm configuring the class path so that I can go get the Gradle Jenkins plugin. This is available in both Maven Central as well as JCenter, depending on your preference. In fact, I would recommend using JCenter because some of its downstream dependencies are only available in JCenter. I apply the plugin Jenkins, and then here's my Jenkins script block. So first thing, I'm defining my server. For the sake of this demo, I'm just doing an insecure server connecting to something on my local host here. I'm calling my server demo. Now here's the next thing. I'm defining a default server. So each of your jobs can be configured to go to any particular server that you configure, or what I can do is just say that there's a default server called servers.demo. Any job that doesn't define its own server, it's just going to use the default server. So you'll see that my job doesn't actually define which server it goes to. It's just going to use the default server here. And my definition, XML file. So I'm loading buildjob.xml from the local file system. And let's get out of here. Let's go ahead and just so you know there's no trickery involved, we'll go ahead and delete this project. You see that I've got a clean Jenkins instance. So if I do Gradle tasks here, you're going to see that I've got a number of tasks. I got all the update Jenkins items, delete Jenkins items, dump Jenkins items, et cetera, et cetera. There's also the legacy task here, the delete Jenkins Jobs. When I originally wrote this, we didn't have support for views. So most of the tasks ended with jobs, and then I changed that later. These are still supported. You can still use them, but at some point they'll be removed. So without further ado, let's go ahead and push our configuration out there. So see that it created the new item, demo job, on my local server. So if I go out and look, there's my demo job. I see that I've got the same description. And if I look at the configuration, you'll see my Gradle script with my build task, et cetera. So that's just a single job. At this point, I can validate it, make sure that it's actually what I expect it to be. Oops. What happened here? Huh, interesting. It's the first time I've seen that behavior. Of course, it would have to show up in a demo. Right? So I have to say, we'll come back to that. I'm not sure what's going on there. I can also delete. All right, what's going on? Yeah, it's the same problem. Not sure what's going on there. So I've removed it here, and you'll see that when I run validate Jenkins items, it recognizes the fact that it's not there, and that this is what would change. Now, it's throwing an exception because the validate is failing, or it's failing to validate. You can configure this too so that it doesn't actually throw a Gradle failure whenever the validate fails, depending on what matters to you. This is just the default behavior. Yeah. It's validating the XML. So what it's doing is an XML comparison between what's configured in Gradle and what's actually running on the session. So it's looking for to see if the same elements, attributes, values are there, and it throws an exception if they aren't. Yeah. So let's move on to another example here. We'll look at templates. And actually, yeah, so that's clean. All right. Okay, so again, I've got that same build script block to add in the Jenkins jar to the class path. I apply my plugin, same server's definition here, but then I've got template definitions. So what I'm using here is the DSL to describe a template. The name of the template is template job. I'm defining the description, I'm defining the display name for the job, and then I'm adding a single step to this, which is a shell script, and the contents of the shell scripts are this echo statement. Down here, I'm generating 2 jobs based off of this template. So I'm iterating over a list. I've got build and release as my 2 job types. And then I'm going to create the name of the job as build underscore whatever the build type is. So it'd be build underscore build and build underscore release. You'd probably be a little more creative than I am with your configuration, but that's what they're going to be named here. And then I'm defining DSL. So the first thing I say is that I'm using the template job that I configured. And then I'm changing the display name. And I'm also adding an additional step to do a Gradle with the task that's whatever I added in here. So basically what I should see are 2 jobs. Each are identical except for the tasks that are in their Gradle step as well as their display name. All right, so I push both of those jobs up there. Build, build, release, which is what I expected to see. And we see that the display names are the display names that we expected and not those of the template because it overrode those. So if we look at the template, the display name was just template job. So we shouldn't see that anywhere, and we don't. And if I were to go into the build job, look at the configuration, I would see that it has added my Gradle script, but the task is build. If I look at my release job, we see that the task is release. So let's try my delete from here. All right, so it's working. I'm not sure what was going on with the other build. But the point is now, if I look out here, it's deleted both of those jobs. such. So let's push them back up there again. We'll do the validate as well. So one of the things that you'll notice too is like, so I just deleted them, so they weren't there. I did the update again. It did push them out there. But if I were to run update again, you see that it's identified that there are no changes to the existing configuration. So it's not even going to bother, pushing them up there. And I can run that as many times as I want. It's still not going to change anything unless I were to actually change something on the jobs. So let's just say we go in here and we'll just add something in here that's going to trigger a difference. So the build job is now different, but the release job is the same. You'll see that it updates the build job, updating item build, and it left the build release job alone. The other thing I can do here, just to show you, is I can do my dump. And what this is going to do is take my configuration, dump it locally. If I look at my tree under build, I've got the server name, demo, the jobs that are on that server, and then one job config XML for each of the jobs that have been configured. All right. Sure.
I'm actually working along with you. Is there a difference between update Jenkins jobs and update Jenkins items?
There isn't. They actually do the same thing. The only difference is that, at some, like I said before, when I originally wrote this, it only did jobs, and then at some point I introduced the support for views, and I decided that it just didn't make sense, to update Jenkins jobs and have it update both jobs and views. So I created the update Jenkins items. Jobs is just going to be removed, over time. It's still supported.
So jobs will update the views as well?
Yeah, it'll do everything. Yeah. So let's go ahead and move on to another example at this point. The other thing I can do too is the dump remote. So I can dump whatever's actually out on the server as well. And if you look, what it does is it under the remotes directory and in build, it creates a similar style tree with all of the job configurations.
Got a question. When you did the update just a minute ago, and you changed it on the Jenkins side, did the text that you got, did it update it in your build.gradle?
No.
Or
No, the update only goes in one direction.
Right direction.
Right, yeah. So it goes from, your Gradle configuration up to the server. Now, if you wanted to go in the opposite direction, you'd probably, at this point, what you'd have to do is do something like the dump remote, pull it down, and then, store it as XML or something like that. I mean, it's,
Remote, is there a directory in the Jenkins home? In your remote server? Create a directory? Remote?
no, that's locally. That's under the build directory of my Gradle build. He's pulling the job configuration from the server down, storing it locally so that you could do something with it. I mean, one of the things that you could do here actually is, dump the local configuration, dump the remote configuration, and then use some sort of diff tool to diff them if you wanted to. I mean, if that was interesting to you.
The naming convention over here, build_build.xml. If I do a local or remote, and I don't have a context of what the job name in my actual Jenkins instance is, how do I map the two? Because the actual name in Jenkins is cool.
Yeah, that's just the display name. If we look at what's out here, you see up here, the actual name, so what you configure as the name of the job in the Gradle configuration is the name of the job on the Jenkins server. You can actually override that. I don't really recommend it if you can get away with it. Yes.
It shows that that job is derived from a template. Where can I define and modify the template?
Can you repeat the question? I can.
It mentioned that this job derived from
A template.
Where can I customize my that template?
The template was actually in the configuration there. So if so this is the template job, right? And then if you look at the job configuration, I said that it was going to use template job. So that's the template that it's pulling, is whatever was defined up in this template job template. And then that that description is just coming out of the template. So, we know that it came from the template because that's where the description was defined. Okay, so let's look at another configuration here. So let's say I'm a build master in an organization where I have sole responsibility over all of the Jenkins jobs in my environment. And basically I want to create a large centralized configuration so that I can kind of manage all of those, leverage some common templates, that sort of thing. I might create a configuration like this. So this is what my configuration, or this is what I built right here. And this is just kind of a small scale thing, but the idea is, you could kind of expand this to whatever you wanted to. So I've got some sub-projects in this Gradle build called builds and deployments. So all of my build jobs I put in this builds directory. All of my deployment jobs I put in the deployments directory. My main configuration defines the stuff that's kind of common to everything, right? So first of all, I'm defining my list of projects. Now, I'm just creating a generic list of projects for the purpose of this demo. But what you would actually do in a real instance is probably pull this out of some sort of service. So I might query something like GitHub, or I might query like my local stash instance, or whatever I'm using to manage all of my projects, from a source control perspective, and pull down the name of the projects as well as the Git repository that they actually reside in. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm just generating 100 different projects. I'm defining what the name of the project is, as well as the URL to the Git repository, and I'm kind of storing that so that I can use it. I define two different servers. I've got a non-production server where I'm going to push all my non-production jobs, and then a production server where I'm going to push my builds for master as well as my production deployment jobs. And then I define a couple of templates, one which is a build template. Actually, let me bring this up. A little bigger font here. All right. So there's my projects. So I non-prod server, prod server. And then I've got a build template, which defines an SCM trigger. It also defines a Gradle step to do a build. It also defines publishers to do email generation. Same thing with deploy, except I don't have an SCM trigger. I just have my deploy step. So two different templates that I'm going to use. If I look at my builds configuration, I'm defining a couple of branches. Now again, I'd probably pull these branches out of a service of some sort that that provides me with the branches that are on this particular project, and that way I could make it dynamic, and as people added branches to the repository, I could just spin up a new set of Jenkins jobs for it. For this example, I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to iterate over my branches, over my projects, and for each project, I'm going to create a build for each branch, is really what it comes down to. So, and then I'm just going to, for my server, I basically say, okay, if the branch is master, then I push it onto my production server. If it's not master, I push it onto the non-prod server. Yeah, question?
So if I understand this correctly, pulling the branches from, say, GitHub, because it's building that model locally and then pushing it to Jenkins, if a branch was deleted off of GitHub, end of the feature or whatever, then that in turn would actually remove that from Jenkins as well.
Not out of the box. You'd have to configure something to recognize that a branch got deleted, and yeah, right. So it's basically taking whatever is in your current model and pushing it up there. So there could be additional stuff in your Jenkins configuration that's not in your in that static model that it's just going to leave alone. It's not my business. I'm not going to touch it. So one of the things that's out there that delete Jenkins items. That's actually I'm not going to get into this in the talk, but that's actually an instance of the delete task, right? And you can actually override those tasks or implement those tasks, put in your own delete statements in there, and do that. So that's one of the things that I would typically do is create like a retire task where I just kind of put things that I know are retired in there and kind of build that up over time. So every time, and then make it a dependency on the update. So every time I do the update, I retire anything that I know is no longer useful. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So, like I said, we're going to set my my server to be the appropriate server depending on the branch that I'm actually operating on, and then I'm just going to create a simple job here with the Git configuration. Let's look at the deployments build.gradle. So similarly, I've got to have some element of variation here. Tags, I'd probably pull that out of some sort of service as well. My environments, this would probably be a static list. I mean, I suppose, you certainly could pull it out of a service, but I can't imagine that this is going to change very much in your environment. But I just defined 3 different environments. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a deployment job for each environment, and then I'm going to create an option on that job that allows the user to pick which tag do I want to actually deploy into that environment. So basically, if the environment is production, I push it to my production server. If it's not production, I push it to my non-prod server. And then I use my deploy template as my basis, and then I configure the parameters. So I set my parameters to a parameter called release. I'm going to make it a choice parameter, and the choices will be the tags that I've defined, so v1.0, v2.0. And then I'm also going to configure the SCM. So let's just go ahead and run this thing. And if you'll notice, when I created my projects, I created 100 different projects. So what we'll see here is something like 300 different jobs get pushed out. Hold on, did I clean up here before? I didn't. Let me clean this up real quick. Just to get the old jobs out of there.
Quick question, as these updates get into Jenkins, basically use those like for active jobs?
Can you repeat the question?
When you're updating things on the Jenkins side, are
Right.
these updates being queued specifically for jobs that are already pre-existing?
When you say queued, are they actually being kicked off?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. All it's doing is just generating the job. So if you look at the Jenkins Job DSL, it's also got the capability of queuing a job. Is that where your question is coming from?
No, I mean if you're changing a job,
Right.
that job is currently active.
Yeah, it's not going to change. It's going to change the configuration, but the job will continue to run. If it's already active, it's already running.
It's not being started.
Yeah, exactly. It's running with the existing configuration and running this. Okay, so I just kicked this off, and you see that it dumped out a whole bunch of jobs here. I don't know. There's several hundred. The other thing that I didn't point out here. Only because you look here too. I also created some views. So for the deployments, I created one view for each environment. And then for the builds, I created one view for each branch. So we'll see those out there as well. So when I look at the configuration now, you see that I've got multiple views. If I look at my developed builds, this is all of the builds on the developed branch, right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Does anything bad happen if somebody manually changes
it would essentially dissociate it from the
Not bad, but
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd really consider it, I think when you go with some sort of external solution like this, you really have to buy into it and say that this is how I'm going to manage my jobs. You really shouldn't get into a situation where people are changing things outside of that and, creating configuration drift. But,
I just say because I've seen an odd case where a scanner that was trying to do some security things accidentally triggered operations in Jenkins while it was scanning.
Oh,
Jenkins, and
right.
It renamed views.
okay. All right.
Is there any reason that you can think of that a developer should just build into their existing, say, a jar job or a jar file build to actually automatically create the Jenkins job to go with that jar file?
Yeah, it's really a question of what your, your responsibilities and such. And actually, the next demonstration, I'm going to show how you, like a delegated model where you could create kind of like a common set of standards and the such, and just kind of expose some knobs that, a development group could twiddle to put into their local build or something like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So when we look at this guy, what we see are my master builds as well as my production deployments here. These are the views that I've got set up, and all of my stuff is in there. So
when the job DSL changes, job DSL plugin itself changes and the breaking change, how do you deal with that?
the Gradle Jenkins plugin currently supports a particular version of the Jobs DSL. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I'd have to go look. That's something I don't really have any control over. So, what I'd probably, if I knew that there were some particular breaking changes, it would probably be a major revision, upgrade in the Gradle Jenkins plugin to say, okay, now we're supporting this new version of Jenkins Job DSL that doesn't support the old DSL forms, and then you would have to basically accept that limitation when you move to the new version of the Gradle Jenkins plugin. Does that make sense?
Do you support with the plugin installing Jenkins plugins or configuring build slaves?
No.
That's out of scope.
Yeah, that's kind of outside of scope. As far as like configuring slaves and things like that, I don't think that that's exposed through the Jenkins REST service. If it is, it's something that I've just never run across. I'd love to be able to support that sort of stuff and just basic Jenkins configuration, but it's just not exposed. So,
Are jobs that has been failing for many times and haven't been run for maybe 6 months? Can this plugin use it to query and then disable all those and delete them and archive them?
yeah, there's no way. I need to start repeating these questions. I'm going to get in trouble for not doing so. The question was, if you've got jobs that are not, that are failing for a long period of time, can you somehow identify those and remove them or disable them or something like that? And the answer is no, because there's, that's not currently built in here. I'm trying to think if there's a way that you could determine that through the REST interface or something. Because really the question would be, how do I identify those particular jobs that are failing for some time? I'd have to think about it, but the answer is no. That capability is not in there right now. But if you did have some other way to determine that, you could basically query that, use it in your Gradle build to decide that, hey, that particular job needs to be disabled. So.
Which actual Jenkins plugins do you depend on being there in base install of Jenkins so that yours can kick off? Is it just the DSL plugin?
Actually, the DSL plugin doesn't even have to be there, because I'm using just the libraries from the Job DSL plugin here. Now, the DSL plugin defines DSL for all sorts of things that are plugins, and those have to be there. Now, what you'll find is that if you push them up there, it'll push it up. It'll happily accept the DSL or the DSL or the configuration, the job configuration that contains the extra elements that aren't supported because you don't have the plugin installed. But what you'll see is that in the, under Manage Jenkins, if you go in there, it'll give you that little warning that it says, you've got deprecated XML or something. I can't remember exactly what the warning is. It'll give you a warning, but that stuff really just won't be configured in your job is what it comes down to. But everything else, that is supported, by whatever's in your Jenkins environment will be there.
Do you support it? We do know that some kind of plugin are available, and then in the DSL version support it. But can we put the snapshot code just like the closure?
Yes.
So we can put and dump into it.
Yeah, I think what your question is can you still use the Jenkins Job DSL configure closure to directly configure the XML? And the answer is yes, you can do it that way. You can also I'm not going to talk about it in this particular talk, but you can also directly manipulate the XML with the Gradle Jenkins plugin too, without even using the DSL capability. So you really got two different ways to approach the same problem. Okay, so let's move on to the last example real quick. I'm going to clean this up. Should take a few seconds. All right. Look here, we should see that all that stuff is gone. And it is, happily. All right. Okay, so let's say in this final scenario, let's say you're kind of a build master, but in your environment there's a lot of freedom and responsibility that's been pushed out to your development groups to define their own jobs and the such. You do have some standards that you want to enforce, but outside of those standards, you allow your development environments or development groups to configure their own stuff, and you just want to expose some knobs and twiddles that they can change. The best way, let me start with the script, and then I'll show you how this is actually done. So, in this particular example, I'm just going to have, a single, as if it's a single project that's maybe just configuring the builds for that particular project and none of the other ones. So, again, he's adding the jar for Gradle Jenkins, but he's also adding this common template jar. Now, this would normally come from a like a binary repository or what have you. For the sake of the demo, I'm just pulling it in off the file system. But this common template jar defines kind of like my organizational standards around my jobs, and then provides the capabilities for creating the different creating a job that complies with those standards. All right, so I apply Jenkins, I define my branches, and now here's where this all occurs. So first thing I do is I say that I'm going to use my common templates, and then instead of defining the server, I just say I want to use the default build server, whatever it is. As a development project, I don't need to know anything about the Jenkins infrastructure. That's all defined for me. I just want to say I'm going to use the default build server. Now, I could potentially have multiple things in here if there were multiple servers that you were pushing to, but for this particular configuration, I'm just defining the default build server. This is coming out of common templates. I'll show you common templates in a second. And then I'm going to iterate over my branches, and for each branch, I'm going to create a standard Gradle job, a Gradle job that complies with my organizational standards. I'm defining the name. I'm telling it what Git URL it's going to use, telling it what branch I want it to build off of, which is going to be either master or develop. I'm going to tell it I want it to poll every 10 minutes for changes on that branch. And then I'm going to say that the tasks that I want it to run are build. And as a development group, this is all I have to define. Everything else is going to happen behind the scenes. using my common build template. So what I've got, now this is in a totally separate project. Again, it's being built, pushed up to the my binary repository, and I'm just pulling it down in my local project. And here's my common templates class here. And what this is doing is, first of all, remember a default build server. What he's doing is injecting all the configuration for the default build server and then setting it up as the default server. Now let me kind of skip down to the bottom here. Here's my Gradle job. So I define Gradle job, and I passed it in a map of parameters. With that, what he's doing is he's got some composable type things here for configuring what is my common configuration for my repository. And I pass in the URL and the branch that came out of the development project. I also have a common configuration for the SCM trigger as well as the Gradle build. So let's look at these kind of composable bits here and look at my repository. So you'll see that I pulled in the repository, the URL and the branch that was provided to me, but I also added in, it's my organizational standard. I always create tags on every build. So I also kind of injected in the logic to configure all the tagging mechanisms and the such for the particular build. As far as the SCM trigger, I pull in the polling interval that they provided, but I also say, I don't want anybody waking me up on a Saturday morning because a build's broken, so I'm only going to run, my organizational standards that we only run our builds on Monday through Friday, that sort of thing. As well as the Gradle build, I inject my common init script, which maybe enforces additional standards on my build or what have you. But I get all of that capability out of get rid of this. There. Out of just this one little snippet of code. And I've really just exposed to my development teams the things that they can change or not. So, any questions on that one? All right. Yeah.
In your Gradle build, the DSL block, anything in that DSL block is literally the job's DSL syntax?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, if you want to look at that again real quick. Basically what I'm doing is, so with default build server, he's going to receive an instance of the Jenkins configuration object, right, which is that Jenkins block. And then I'm saying Jenkins.with, and then I'm providing all of this configuration, which he's then just going to use the Jenkins configuration object to do that configuration. The same thing with that DSL. DSL is actually a method on the Jenkins job object, right? And so I'm just really using some of the smoke and mirrors from Groovy to make this nice and clean, something that I can configure without a lot of verbosity, right? Okay. All right. So moving on, you remember this question? Does it make sense to manage Jenkins with a build automation tool? I think it's the wrong question. The right question is Gradle a build automation tool? Is a Swiss Army knife a knife? Sure, but it's much more than that. And I think that Gradle is not just a build automation tool. It's an automation platform. And it can be used to solve any automation problem within your continuous delivery pipeline. So if you don't walk away from this this presentation with anything else, maybe that concept kind of sticks in your mind, and you possibly find other ways to apply Gradle to maybe non-intuitive problems within your pipeline. So that's all I have. Some references. This first one is the link to Gradle Jenkins Plugin GitHub URL. There's a wiki out there that's got more documentation on how to use all of this stuff. The demos that I used in this particular thing are in this GitHub URL for Summit 2014, so you can go and pull those down, look at them, and try to understand them. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, feel free to hit me up at my Gradleware address, gary.hale@gradleware.com, or file issues or whatever against the Gradle Jenkins GitHub project. And at this point, I'm also supposed to, go away, flash this up there. So, any further questions?
Do you foresee any of those templates becoming more like plugins for other people to kind of pull down and customize or extend from in the future?
That's actually a great possibility. I mean, I'd love to see people building up libraries of those templates out there that other people could use. Yeah, I could totally see that. No, not at all. I mean, it'd be fine. There's no reason. It's really just a question of, okay, what are some of the boundaries in your organization? Who's responsible for what? So the templates are really just a convenience mechanism to allow you to create a common configuration that then gets used multiple times. So that might just be you're only going to use it 3 times within your local project, and nobody else is going to use it. Or it might be at a larger perspective, more organizational templates that everybody's going to use.
Yeah, small organization.
Yeah, certainly. So the question was, if I'm using Jenkins Job DSL, I've already got jobs defined within there. Can I use this to basically continue managing those existing jobs? And the answer is yes. Do you have that stuff stored like in DSL scripts? I mean, do you have it externalized?
Right now it's in Ruby script.
Right.
Ruby shell script, which I call it for each.
Right. So in your Jenkins Job DSL job, you're just saying, okay, go load the stuff that's in this script, right? Yeah. So I don't know if you remember in one of the slides in here, I was showing you the multiple DSL form, which basically says, go load this stuff from the file system, right? And so what you could do is just point it directly to your existing DSL scripts, and they should just work. There are some possibilities that there might be, some obscure piece of DSL that doesn't work within Gradle, but I haven't necessarily found that yet. So, okay, thanks for coming, guys.